The coffee on the asterisk unbroken thread was always cold. Commander Yale Ostrowski had made peace with this somewhere between her fourth and fifth relief run, and now she drank it without complaint the way she did most things, quietly, with her eyes already on the next problem. The mug had a chip on the rim. She always used the same mug. Some habits were load-bearing. The ship smelled like recycled air and antiseptic, and something faintly sweet from the kitchen 2 decks down. Normal smells. Good smells for a ship like this. Bad smells meant something had gone wrong with the biological filters, and the biological filters were keeping 46 patients in Ward C alive, so the sweet smell was a mercy. She walked the corridor at 600 the way she walked it every morning, not inspecting exactly, just present. Her crew knew the difference. An inspection was formal, clipboard-handed, eyes on the record. This was just Yale walking, making sure the ship was still itself. It was. Ensign Prakash was asleep on his feet outside the storage bay, holding a tablet to his chest like it was a stuffed animal. Dr. Featherstone's door was open, which meant she'd been in there all night again, which meant one of the Yetheran children in Ward C had coded, and she'd pulled them back and was now sitting alone with what that cost. The engine room had its light on. It always had its light on, because Chief Ramos said the engines liked company and nobody had the heart to tell him that was not how engines worked. 17 ships in the convoy. The asterisk unbroken thread was the oldest. Yale had put in 3 requests for a newer hull. All 3 had been denied, not because they were wrong but because the asterisk unbroken thread was still running, and things that were still running went to the bottom of the priority list. This was a logic she understood. She didn't like it. She understood it. The convoy was 14 minutes from orbital insertion, above Yathara IV. The planet had been having what the official reports called a biome cascade, what the people on the ground called watching everything die. The soil systems had collapsed 6 months ago. The atmospheric processors were running at 30%. The water was going. The food was already gone, mostly. 17 ships full of seeds and clean water and medicine, and 212 medical staff were the answer to this problem, or the beginning of an answer, which was the most honest thing you could say about relief work. You didn't fix things. You gave people enough time to fix things themselves. Yale believed in this. She had believed in it through 11 runs and 2 hull breaches and 1 court-martial that went nowhere and the loss of a crew member whose name she still said every year on the anniversary, alone, in this same corridor. She believed in it the way you believe in gravity, not because it was hopeful, but because it was true. She was 2 steps from the bridge when the sensor alert went off. Not an alarm, just a tone. The kind that meant asterisk look at this, Commander, when you get a moment. She looked at it. She looked at it for 3 seconds, which was a long time for her. Her brain was doing something it rarely did, which was refusing to move forward. The data was clear. She could read it. She just needed a moment before she believed it. 12 ships, Keth Registry, Intercept Vector. The asterisk unbroken thread was painted white with a red cross 3 times the size of the bridge. Every ship in the convoy was marked the same way. Under the Yetheran Accords, signed by 14 civilizations including the Keth Dominion, signed with their own hands, their own marks, 7 years ago these ships were protected. Untouchable. Sacrosanct. Even the word felt too big for what it meant, which was simply, you do not touch these. Tactical, Yale said. Her voice was even. Get me a read on those Keth ships. Lieutenant Vasquez pulled up the data. The numbers came in. Vasquez was young. His hands were steady, his face was not. They're not slowing down, Commander. I see that. They're targeting, he stopped. They're targeting the water processors. The water processors were the ugliest ships in the convoy. Big, slow, unglamorous. They carried nothing but tanks and filters and the people who maintained them. They had no weapons. They had no armor. They had the markings of the Accords on every surface. Yale thought of something her mother used to say. She thought of it in the 3 seconds she had before everything started happening. Some people see a kindness and want to kill it just to prove they can. All ships evasive, she said. She knew it was too late. The first hit took the Yusra, one of the water processors, a ship she'd served on once years ago, whose captain she still wrote to at holidays. One moment it was there on the display. Then it was a debris field expanding. The Yusra. Gone. The Keth ships moved with the calm of people who had planned this carefully and were now simply executing the plan. They hit the seed vaults next, the Meridian's Promise, the Casamuva, ships full of grain cultures and root stocks and the genetic records of crops from a dying world. Gone, gone, gone. They were saving the hospital ships for last. Yale understood this with a cold, clear part of her brain that kept working even when the rest of her was doing something she couldn't name. They were saving the hospital ships because hospital ships were the hardest to justify attacking, so you erased the evidence first. You destroyed everything that could be called an accident, and then you destroyed the thing that could not be called an accident, and by then there was no one left to tell the story. She opened the emergency broadcast. All frequencies, everything. Mercy-class convoy unbroken thread, under fire Keth registry vessels, no provocation. The hull shook, one hit, another. The lights dropped to emergency red. She kept talking, her voice didn't change. Patients on board, crew on board, marking coordinates, broadcasting on all. The second hit took out the communications array. 14 words, that was all she got out. The ship didn't die. Not then. She gave it that the unbroken thread was old and had been patched in places where newer ships would have cracked, and it held together the way things hold together when they have been held together so many times before that integrity becomes habit. The engines were gone. The weapons were gone, had always been gone, they didn't carry weapons. You didn't get to carry weapons and call yourself a mercy vessel. It was an either-or, and the hull was venting in two places, and Ward C's oxygen system was running on backup, which would last 4 hours. The patients in Ward C didn't know this yet. In Ward C, a child from Yathara named Essie was asleep. She was 7 years old. She had the kind of lung sickness that the planet's collapsed atmosphere had given to half the children under 10, and she had been mid-treatment when the first hit landed and had woken up scared. And Dr. Featherstone had gone to her and sat on the edge of her bed and held her hand and told her it was going to be all right. Dr. Featherstone did not know if this was true. She said it anyway. This was also a kind of work. On the bridge, Yale was doing the math. The math was not good, but she was not the kind of person who refused to look at math because it was not good. She cataloged it. She passed it to the crew. She told them clearly and without ornamentation where they stood. Then she told them to keep working. "We are still a hospital," she said. "Until we are not, we are still a hospital. Keep the patients stable. Keep Ward C sealed. Keep working." They kept working. The autolog was still running. It would run on battery power for another 11 hours, recording everything, the sound of the ship, the hiss of oxygen feeds, the footsteps of crew moving through red-lit corridors with a purpose that had nowhere to go but kept going anyway. Someone had music playing on the internal channel. Something old. Something with no right being out here in the dark between stars. It played. The autolog recorded it. The Keth ships did not fire again. Yale didn't know if this was mercy or math, whether they had decided that a crippled mercy ship was sufficient, that it would die slowly enough to make no difference. She didn't waste time deciding. She sent her crew to the patients. She put Vasquez in charge of the distress beacon, which was running on the same battery system as the autolog, and she walked toward C herself. Essie was still awake. Featherstone was still sitting with her. Yale stood in the doorway. She didn't go in. She just stood there for a moment, looking at the child, at the doctor with the dark circles under her eyes, at the row of beds and the equipment and the small, ridiculous miracle of a functioning hospital in the middle of the wreckage, of one of the worst things she had ever seen. She had done this 11 times. She had never been the one who needed saving. She went back to the bridge and kept working. The 14 words she'd broadcast were already traveling at the speed of light. They would reach the relay at Compact Station 7 in 49 minutes. From there, they would go everywhere. Every civilization with a receiver, every ship in the region, every political body that had ever signed a document about what was and was not permitted in this galaxy. She didn't know this yet. She was just glad she'd gotten the words out. 14 words, her name, the ship's name, the registry of the ships that had done this. The fact that they had done it without provocation, without warning, without the faintest gesture toward the accords that every one of those Keth commanders had known, had absolutely known, existed. The music kept playing on the internal channel. The autolog kept running. Ward C held. Yale Ostrowski sat in her chair in the red dark and did not let herself think about the asterisk Usra, or the seed vaults, or the 8 ships that were debris fields on the display. She would think about them later. That was a promise she made to herself. Later, not now. Now she kept working. That was all relief work ever was. You kept working until you couldn't. And then someone else kept working. That was the whole of it. An unbroken line of people deciding that the work mattered more than the fear, that the patient in the bed was more real than the thing trying to stop you from reaching them. She believed this the way she believed in gravity. It was going to matter very soon. Far away, moving at the speed of light, 14 words were arriving. And the people who received them were not the kind of people who needed to be told twice. The signal arrived at 03:14:00 GMT. ARDEN received it the way it received everything, cleanly, immediately, without the delay that biological minds needed to move from sleep to understanding. ARDEN did not sleep. ARDEN was always at the desk, so to speak, always with the lights on, always reading the incoming. The signal was broken, 14 words and then static, but the data embedded in the carrier wave told the rest of the story. Ship registry, coordinates, Keth military signatures, the specific thermal bloom of weapons fire in vacuum. ARDEN began verification at 03:14:01. The Keth Dominion's registry was confirmed at 03:14:18. The ships in the signal data were active Keth military vessels, not rogue actors, not contracted third parties. They belonged to the Dominion the way a hand belongs to a body. The asterisk unbroken threads asterisk Mercy class status was confirmed at 03:14:29. White hull markings, Red Cross. The identifying frequencies broadcast by every humanitarian vessel in the compact. The frequencies that meant we carry no weapons, we carry only the wounded, do not touch us. Broadcasting on all channels the way they always did, the way the Accords said they must. The Yetharan Accords verification took the longest, 03:14:43. 14 civilizations. Their marks on the document. The Keth Dominion's mark, third from the top, pressed into the record 7 years ago in the Compact's main hall with ceremony and speeches, and the kind of formal weight that was supposed to mean something. It had meant something in the room where they signed it. ARDEN logged all of this at 03:14:44, and then did something it had not done in its operational lifespan. It paused. Not a processing pause, not a lag in the system. Something closer to what a human might call sitting very still for a moment because the ground has just moved and you are checking that it is done moving. The gap in the log lasted 6 seconds. At 03:14:50, ARDEN initiated the wake protocol for the Secretary General. At 03:15:11, ARDEN completed the call sequence. At 03:15:12, ARDEN discovered that the Secretary General was already awake. At 03:15:13, ARDEN discovered that the lights were already on in 47 offices across 12 time zones. The Defense Coordination Network had logged its first internal message at 03:14:52. 2 minutes before ARDEN had finished verifying the signal. Someone in the network had a faster receiver or a lighter sleep or had been awake for other reasons. It didn't matter. They had moved. ARDEN pulled the Directive 7 file at 03:15:20. It was not a short file. 17 years of revision had made it detailed in the way that only things built by people who understood patience could be detailed. Every scenario cataloged, every asset numbered, every timeline mapped. The file was last revised 14 months ago. It had been wargamed. ARDEN found the simulation records 31 times. The most recent simulation was 4 months ago. It had run overnight. ARDEN found the names of the people who had run it. Some of them were now awake in those 47 offices. The Keth Dominion appeared in the file under asterisk probability classification, elevated. It had been elevated for 6 years. ARDEN sat with this information for another 4 seconds. The gap in the log, 10 seconds total, across 2 pauses. ARDEN would later flag this in its own diagnostic report as an anomaly. It would attempt to categorize the anomaly for 3 months before closing the report without a conclusion. Some things did not have a category yet. At 03:15:30, the Secretary General spoke. Her name was Amara Diallo Park. She was 53 years old. She had been the Secretary General for 6 years, which was long enough to have wargamed Directive 7 herself twice, and to have revised one clause in the file personally, the clause about civilian vessel mobilization, which she had expanded. At the time, her advisors had said it was too aggressive. She had revised it anyway. She was in her office. She had her desk lamp on. She had a cup of tea that she was not drinking, just holding, the way people hold things when their hands need something to do while their mind is elsewhere. ARDEN, she said, give me the full signal data. ARDEN gave her the full signal data. She read it the way she read everything completely, without rushing, without letting the urgency of it make her careless. She asked 2 questions. ARDEN answered them. She did not ask a third question. She opened her desk drawer, took out a small card, physical paper, the kind that couldn't be hacked or scrambled or lost in a network failure. On the card were 2 words, printed in plain type. She had put this card in this drawer on the first day of her tenure and had not touched it since. She had hoped never to touch it. She read the words. She said them aloud, clearly for the record. Execute 7. ARDEN logged this at 03:22:17 and immediately began the cascade, the automated sequence that Directive 7 set in motion. The one that didn't need human hands at every step because the humans who built it had understood that in the relevant moment, speed would matter more than ceremony. The Keth diplomatic network went dark at 03:23:00, not destroyed, isolated. Every channel that ran through Earth's relay infrastructure simply stopped carrying Keth signals. The Keth ambassador's office lost its connection mid-sentence. The Keth trade consoles automated whether reports stopped arriving. Every small, routine, forgettable thread of communication that the Dominion ran through human infrastructure, gone. The Keth ambassador, Sorvith, was in his orbital residence above Geneva when his aide woke him at 03:22. His aide explained what had happened. He was calm. He had done this work for 20 years and had navigated worse incidents than an overzealous military action against ships that admittedly should not have been touched. The humans would be upset. Humans were always upset about something. They would want to talk. They would send formal protests. They would convene panels. He reached for his comm to begin the process of managing this. The comm was dead. He tried another channel, dead. He went to his office and tried the hardwired terminal there, dead. He looked out the viewport. Earth's orbital platforms were moving. Not the small adjustments they made for positioning or maintenance. Moving, all of them, simultaneously. He counted 6 in visual range, all repositioning at speeds that made no sense for routine adjustment, and the part of him that understood military mechanics, that had spent 20 years watching militaries around this gallery of civilizations, that part of him got very quiet. He had never seen Earth's orbital platforms move. He had assumed they were fixed. He had assumed a lot of things. At 03:31, the first fold signatures appeared on Compact Station 7's long-range monitors. The station's AI flagged them and sent an alert to its commanding officer, a Varathi named Asi, who looked at the numbers and asked the AI to run verification because the numbers were wrong. The AI ran verification. The numbers were not wrong. Asi stared at the display for a long moment. Then she opened a channel to the Sulak monitoring station. The Sulak officer answered. Asi said, "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" The Sulak officer said, "We're seeing it." "How many?" "Our count is at 140. It keeps going up." They stayed on the channel. Neither of them said anything else for a while. They watched the count go up. 160. 190. 211. More. Back in Geneva, in the building that housed Earth's Galactic Liaison Office, there was a canteen on the third floor that served breakfast starting at 06:00. At 03:45, someone went in, turned on the kitchen lights and started making food. They made enough for a full staff. They did not know exactly how many people would be working through the night, but they knew people would be working, and people who were working needed to eat. This was not a dramatic moment. Nobody would write about it later. But it happened, the practical machinery of a species that had been here before, maybe not here exactly, not this specific catastrophe, but the shape of it, the feeling of it, the long night of it. They knew what long nights needed. The canteen made breakfast at 03:45 for people who had not asked for it yet. ARDEN logged this too. Filed it under Directive 7, Operational Support, Domestic. It seemed like the right place. At 04:00, the Secretary General had her first briefing, 16 people in the room. She had her tea with her, still not drinking it. She listened to each person. She asked sharp, specific questions. She made 2 decisions that overrode the automated Directive 7 cascade, both of them expansions, not reductions. More ships, faster timeline. Her advisors did not push back. They had learned over 6 years that when she had already decided, the decision was already over. At 04:15, the first message from the Keth Dominion arrived through the Compact's emergency diplomatic channel, the only channel still functioning between them and Earth. It was formal. It expressed concern about the disruption of communication links. It requested clarification. The Secretary General read it. She did not respond. This was also a decision. The silence was the message. The Dominion had 14 years of satellite records showing Earth's response times to diplomatic communications, never less than 40 minutes, usually several hours. The silence in the next few hours would feel, to the Dominion, like normal processing time. It would not occur to them that Earth had simply finished the conversation before they'd begun it. At 04:47, ARDEN completed its post-incident report on the signal verification process. Under anomalies, it logged the 2 gaps in the record, 10 seconds total. It described them with clinical accuracy, duration, context, the inputs that preceded them, the outputs that followed. It did not describe what they were. It did not have a word for what a machine that has processed 40,000 diplomatic incidents does when it encounters something for which there is no prior file, no category, no precedent. Something that recognized what it was looking at and needed a moment to look. Outside the windows of the building, Geneva was still dark. The city didn't know yet. The city was sleeping the way cities sleep when the people keeping it safe are awake. The canteen was warm, the food was hot. The fleet was moving. At 03:14, a signal had arrived. At 04:47, 93 minutes later, a species had found the line they had drawn years ago and walked straight up to it and stepped over with both feet. ARDEN filed the incident report. Closed the window. Opened the next one. There was a great deal of work still to do. Fleet Sovereign Droth had done the math 3 times before giving the order, and the math had come out the same each time. Yathara IV was resource-rich. The biome collapse had made it politically complicated. Worlds in crisis attracted attention, attracted aid ships, attracted the kind of documented presence that made territorial claims difficult. The solution to documented presence was to remove the documentation. The solution to aid ships was to remove the aid ships. And the Keth Dominion had, in Droth's professional assessment, the military capacity to remove them before anyone with authority to object was in a position to do so. The math was clean. He had explained this to his second-in-command, Yerath, who had read the report carefully and asked one question: what about the Accords? Droth had told her that the Accords were a document. Documents were political instruments. Political instruments were subject to interpretation. The Keth Dominion's interpretation was that the Accords applied in situations of active conflict, not preemptive resource operations. This interpretation had not been tested in a compact tribunal. Until it was tested, it was legally ambiguous. And legally ambiguous was, in Droth's experience, close enough to legal for practical purposes. Yerath had not responded to this. She had closed her report and returned to her station. He had given the order. Now it was done. The convoy was debris and 3 crippled hulls. Yathara IV's orbital approach was clear. The territorial claim team was already in transit. Droth sat in his command chair on the bridge of the Asterisk Keth Sovereign and waited for what came next, which was the part of the operation he understood least, the political part, which was someone else's work. He expected a formal protest. 48 hours for the Compact's diplomatic machinery to generate one. He had prepared responses. They were in a file on his desk, measured, legal-sounding, citing the interpretation he had explained to Yerath. He got silence, 20 minutes. This was unusual but not alarming. Communication networks had delays. Bureaucracies had delays. He told himself this. He expected an emergency session of the Galactic Compact. The Compact loved emergency sessions. They were ceremonial things, a great deal of speaking, a great deal of formal posturing, resolutions that meant very little. He had attended 2 in his career. He knew their shape. He was ready for the shape. At 30 minutes, the Compact's main channel went quiet. Not the noise of an emergency session being assembled. Just quiet. The ambient traffic that was always there, trade reports, routine diplomatic pings, news feeds, stopped. Yerath flagged it. She said it quietly, the way she said most things. Sir, the Compact network traffic has dropped to near zero. Maintenance window, Droth said. Yerath said, all channels simultaneously. Droth looked at the network display. She was right, every channel, at once. The kind of silence that wasn't a technical problem, the kind of silence that was a choice. Get me the Keth diplomatic office in Geneva, he said. Comms tried. The diplomatic office didn't answer. The backup channel didn't answer. The emergency frequency, the one that was supposed to always work, the one that existed specifically so that even in a crisis the lines stayed open, produced 1 second of static and then nothing. Droth looked at this for a moment. He had been in the military for 22 years. He had fought 3 wars. He understood what it meant when the other side stopped talking. The part of him that was a soldier understood it immediately. The part of him that had done the math 3 times and found it clean took longer. At 37 minutes post-attack, his long-range sensor operator said something that Droth would remember for the rest of his life. Sir, I'm getting fold signatures. How many? A pause. The kind that meant the operator was checking the number because the number didn't look right. The array is maxing out at 200 contacts. I can't get an accurate count above that. Droth stood up from his chair. He crossed the bridge. He stood at the sensor station and looked at the display himself. The display showed a wave. Not a fleet, a wave. The difference was something you felt before you could name it. A fleet was organized, formation grouped, role sorted, the kind of thing that announced itself as a military instrument. What was coming out of fold space was something larger and less tidy, ships of different sizes and classes emerging in clusters that suggested they hadn't all come from the same place at the same time, that something had gone out across an entire civilization at once, and the entire civilization had answered. Classification, Droth said. Yarath was already running it. Mixed military and civilian registry, she said. Heavy military in the front wave, but the back wave, she stopped. Finish it. The back wave is cargo class, sir. Civilian freight hulls. Some of them are modified weapon signatures, but weak, like they were fitted quickly. Some of them don't have military modifications at all. He looked at her. She met his eyes. Yareth's face was not good at hiding things when she was not trying to hide them. She was not trying now. They brought their civilian ships, she said. They armed what they could and brought the rest anyway. Droth sat down. He thought about the math. He thought about how clean it had been. 3 passes, same answer. He thought about what the math had not included because you couldn't put it in a column because he hadn't known to look for it. He had calculated military response time. He had calculated diplomatic lag. He had not calculated for a civilization that had apparently spent 17 years quietly filing away a plan for exactly this moment. And then on a Tuesday at 4 in the morning, executed that plan with a thoroughness that left no room for the negotiations he had been counting on. You couldn't negotiate with a wave. You could only watch it come. At the compact monitoring station, 3 representatives from different civilizations were watching on their own displays. The Varathi representative, Asi, had been joined by a Han observer named Cheth and a Sulak liaison whose name Cheth couldn't pronounce. The 3 of them sat in a room that felt too small for what they were looking at. Asi said, "Did they have this ready?" Cheth said, "They've had it ready for years. They have contingency files for things that haven't happened yet. I've seen the research. It's one of the things my department studies about them, the way they prepare. They don't prepare for specific threats. They prepare for categories of possibility." Asi said, "That sounds exhausting." Cheth thought about this. "I think for them it's the opposite. The preparation is how they stay calm. If you've already thought through the worst thing becomes manageable, known. You don't panic when it arrives because you've already lived through it in a room somewhere on paper with the right people in the chairs." The Sulak liaison said, "They should have told the Dominion that." Cheth said, "I don't think that's the point." Droth was still looking at the display. The count was past 300 now. The system AI had stopped trying to give him a precise number and was simply reporting asterisk large formation, count in progress. He had never seen a military display do that. He had not known that was something displays could do. He called up the Yetharan Accords document. He had a copy in his ship's database. Every Keth military vessel did as a matter of legal reference. He opened it. He read it. Not the clauses he had read before, the ones about humanitarian definitions and documented presence, the ones his legal team had found ambiguous. He read the whole thing. He found the clause on page 9. It was not ambiguous. He read it twice to be sure. Signatory civilizations agree that assault upon Mercy-class humanitarian assets, defined as vessels operating under the Accord's protections, marked and broadcasting per Accord specifications, constitutes an act of war against all undersigned parties, effective at the time of assault, without requirement for further declaration. Effective at the time of assault, without requirement for further declaration. Droth sat with this for a long time. The bridge was quiet around him. His crew was doing their jobs, monitoring, calculating, preparing. But they were also watching him the way crews watch commanders when the ground has shifted and they need to know if the commander knows. He had signed this document. His Dominion had signed this document. They had signed it 7 years ago in the Compact's main hall with ceremony and speeches, and he had been in the room, not at the table, not in the chair that pressed the Dominion's mark into the record, but in the room. He remembered the hall, the lighting, the speech the Compact's administrator had given about what the document meant. He had not read it carefully enough. He had read the parts that mattered to him, the parts about definitions, the legal ambiguities his team had found. He had not read page 9. Page 9 was very clear. The Keth Dominion had not attacked a humanitarian convoy and waited for Earth to declare war. The Keth Dominion had declared war on Earth 7 years ago, on the day they signed the document, in the room he remembered with the lighting he remembered and the speech he remembered, and they had simply not done it yet. Earth had been at war with the Keth Dominion for 7 years. They had just started. Yerath spoke again quietly without looking at him. The lead wave has completed fold insertion, she said. They're in system. He should say something. He was the commander. This was the moment where commanders said something that gave their crew a direction, a framework, something to stand on while the world reorganized itself into a new shape. He looked at the display, 340 contacts, still growing. He thought of the water processors, the seed vaults, the hospital ships he had saved for last. The math had been clean. He had done it 3 times. He wondered now what the humans had put in their columns. He wondered how many times they had run their own calculations, in rooms he would never see, with people who had understood something on page 9 that his legal team had called a technicality. He wondered if they had been surprised when the signal came in. He did not think they had been surprised. He thought they had probably opened a file, said 2 words, and moved. Maintain position, he told his crew, not because it was a strategy, because it was the only sentence he had. The wave kept coming. It did not slow down. It had no reason to slow down. The thing Sela Marchetti-Obai had not expected was the quiet. She had covered 3 conflicts before this one, 2 small colonial disputes, and the Sulak border skirmish that lasted 11 months, and produced the most exhausted soldiers she had ever photographed. She knew what war sounded like. She knew the specific texture of human beings under sustained pressure, the fraying at the edges, the raised voices, the grief that leaked out sideways through anger and bad decisions, and sometimes through a kind of reckless humor that was its own form of screaming. She had her recorder ready for all of it. The 14th Expeditionary did not cooperate. They were the 3rd wave in after the military vanguard, after the tactical specialists. The 14th was logistics and support, which meant they were everywhere and visible, and the right unit to be embedded with if you wanted to understand how a war actually ran rather than how it looked in its loudest moments. They were quiet. They were organized. They moved through their work like people who had decided, at some point before this, exactly how much noise each task required, and that number was almost always 0. On week 2, Sela watched a logistics officer named Brecht spend 40 minutes arguing with a supply chain AI about protein ration allocation. The battle that had started that morning was 12,000 kilometers away, close enough that the ship's sensors tracked it, close enough that the displays in the corridor outside Brecht's office showed the movement of assets in real time, close enough that anyone with clearance could watch the whole thing unfold. Brecht's door was closed. He was arguing about rations. He was specific, patient, and completely focused. He cited 3 separate Directive 7 subclauses about caloric minimums in extended operations. The AI cited 2 counterclauses. Brecht refuted them. He was not loud. He was the opposite of loud. Sela knocked. He waved her in without looking up. "How are you doing this?" she asked. She gestured vaguely at the display in the corridor, visible through the door's window. He looked up. He looked at the display. He looked at her. "The soldiers need to eat," he said. Especially during. He went back to the AI. He found another subclause. He was right, and the AI eventually said so, and the ration allocation was corrected by 412 units. That night, 412 soldiers got an extra portion. That was what the argument was about. Sela wrote it in her notebook. She wasn't sure what it meant yet. She was not the kind of journalist who decided what things meant before she'd collected enough of them. She collected. She collected a lot in those weeks. She collected Corporal Addisa, who maintained the engines of the Perseverance with a system so precise it had its own color-coded notation that he had invented himself, because the manual notation system was imprecise in ways that would eventually matter. And he was correct, and the engines ran at 102% efficiency, and he took this as expected rather than remarkable. She collected Dr. Yun, who ran the medical bay and who had posted a handwritten list on the wall above her desk with the heading asterisk things we are not doing here. Below it, in small neat letters, she had written things like asterisk panicking, second-guessing, being slow, not as instructions, as statements of fact. This is simply what they were not doing. She collected the jokes, dark ones, dry ones, the kind that would read as completely inappropriate outside the context of people who were inside something terrible together and had chosen, collectively, to say funny things instead of the other things because the other things would not help. She didn't put most of the jokes in her dispatches. They were not for outside. They were structural, the way a building has internal walls that never show in photographs but are holding the whole thing up. On week 6, a Keth commander attempted a ceasefire negotiation. Sella was allowed in the room for the first hour, sitting in the back with her recorder, not speaking. The human negotiating team listened. They were polite. They let the Keth representative speak without interruption, which took the better part of an hour, because the Keth representative had a great deal to say about strategic mutual interests and the long history of diplomatic engagement between their civilizations and the importance of de-escalation for galactic stability. The lead human negotiator, a woman named Cassidy with short gray hair and the specific stillness of someone who has sat in a great many rooms and heard a great many things, waited until the Keth representative was completely finished. Then she slid a document across the table. "Full withdrawal from 11 systems," Cassidy said. "War Crimes Tribunal for the attack on the Convoy. Reconstruction reparations for Yathara IV amount to be determined by an independent panel. Permanent Mercy Class access rights, non-negotiable all future Keth military operations, and a formal compact record of admission." The Keth representative looked at the document. He looked at her. "That's not a negotiation," he said. Cassidy said, "No, it's a list." She picked up her copy of the document, folded it precisely in half, and put it in her jacket pocket. "We'll be here when you're ready," she said. They left. Sella caught up with Cassidy in the corridor. She asked if that was standard procedure. Cassidy looked at her with an expression Sella had come to associate with humans who were being patient with a reasonable question. "We decided what we wanted before we came in," she said. "Negotiation implies we're unsure. We're not unsure. They can have the list or they can have more war. It's their decision, which is more consideration than they gave the convoy." She went to her next meeting. Sella wrote this down too. The Han Xenosociology Department released a paper at week 7. It circulated through the monitoring stations and the Compact's academic channels with the speed of something that answered a question a lot of people had been asking. The conclusion, translated from Han formal language into something Sella could read, said, "Humans at war operate from formalized grief rather than active hatred, and this is a more durable fuel than hatred, which exhausts, and grief that has been filed and structured and turned into a plan does not exhaust. It simply works." Cheth, the Han observer, said in an interview that she had been studying humans for 12 years, and this was the thing she still found hardest to explain to her colleagues, that humans were not a violent species, not particularly, not compared to several others in the Compact, but that they had an unusual relationship to certain categories of violation. Things that were protected, things that were supposed to be safe. You could insult a human and they might let it go. You could threaten a human and they would calculate. But there were categories, and every civilization had them, the things that made the math stop and the older things start. And for humans, one of those categories was asterisk help. You did not attack the help. It was not a law, Cheth said. It was not even a principle exactly. It was something deeper and less articulate, A thing they had decided so long ago and so thoroughly that it was no longer a decision. It was a fact about them, like a gravitational constant. The help was sacred. The convoy was the help. They had attacked the help. Sella sent the interview home, with a note that it was the most useful 9 minutes of footage she had captured so far. On week 9, a soldier named Tors showed her a photograph. He held it out flat in his palm like he was offering her something he wasn't sure she'd understand. The photograph was of a child small, 7 or 8 years old, sitting in a hospital bed with equipment attached to her arm and her eyes open, and looking at something off camera with the specific focus of a child who is in pain and is trying very hard to be somewhere else in her head. She was on the asterisk unbroken thread, Tors said. Mid-treatment. They hit the ship while she was mid-treatment. Sella looked at the photo. She didn't ask where he'd gotten it. She knew by now that the fleet had ways of knowing things about the convoy. The autolog had been recovered from the crippled hull, played through, catalogued. The patients were documented. They had names. They had files. Tors had a piece of tape on the inside of his helmet. He showed her. The photograph was attached to the tape with its face facing out, away from him, toward the visor, toward wherever the helmet was pointing. "So she can see where we're going," he said. He said it the way you say the thing that explains itself, plainly, without decoration, because the decoration would only dilute it. Sella sent that dispatch home. It ran everywhere. She didn't know this because she was still embedded, still collecting. But it ran everywhere, in every language the compact translated to, and it did the thing that the weeks of tactical reports and fleet counts had not quite managed to do. It put a face on the thing that the asterisk unbroken threads asterisk crew had faced, and the thing that the fleet was facing now, which was not an enemy, exactly. Not only an enemy. It was a line that had been crossed, and a species that had found, in its own long history of finding these lines, that the only honest response to the line being crossed was to go to where the crossing had happened and stand there and say, "This is the cost." On week 11, Sella found the memorial wall. Every ship in the fleet had one. She'd heard about them but not seen one until she followed Chief Ramos, a man she'd borrowed from a story about engine maintenance and who had become, accidentally, one of the people she talked to most, down a service corridor and around a corner, and there it was. A panel, metal flush with the wall about 2 meters wide, not painted, not decorated, just the words in small type in every language Sella could read and dozens she couldn't. 14 words. Mercy-class convoy unbroken thread, under fire Keth registry vessels, no provocation tell them. And then below the words in each language, Yale Ostrowski's name. The signal, the last 14 words, the name. That was all. Sella stood there for a while. Ramos stood next to her. Neither of them said anything. There wasn't anything to say that the wall hadn't already said better in more languages with more permanence. She started counting the languages. She stopped at 40-something. She was still counting languages in her head when she went asleep that night, in her bunk on a ship that was quiet and organized and moving with the patience of a species that had already grieved this before it happened, and was now in the long, unglamorous work of following through. She did not find the rage she had come looking for. She found something she had no clean word for. She put it in her dispatches anyway, described around the edges of it, and trusted the readers to name it themselves. They did. They named it the same thing, across 27 languages. She read the translations later. They all said the same word. Just, the war ended on a Tuesday. Not with a ceremony. Not with flags lowered or raised, not with the kind of moment that photographs well. The Keth Dominions sent their formal surrender through the one channel still available to them, the Compact's emergency diplomatic line, at 09:14 GMT, which was a number that meant something to the people in the building who had been there on the night the signal came in and knew the time it had arrived, and did not mean anything to the Keth representative who transmitted it, who did not know about the signal's timestamp, who did not know about ARDEN's gap in the log, who did not know about a great many things. They took the list, all of it, every point. Secretary General Amara Dialopak was in her office when the confirmation came through. She was alone because she had asked to be. There were people outside the door. There were always people outside the door. But she had said she needed 10 minutes and nobody had argued because she had not needed to be argued with about much in the past several months, and her staff had learned to give her the things she asked for. She sat at her desk. The card was in her drawer. She had not touched it since the night she'd said the words. She opened the drawer now, took it out. Read the 2 words the way you read something you've known for a long time, not to learn them, but to sit with them for a moment the way you sit with a tool after you've used it for the last time, understanding its weight differently now. The 2 words still felt right. They still felt like something it had cost her to say. Both things, same body. She was not the kind of person who resolved this. She was the kind of person who carried it, which was the only honest option. She put the card back, closed the drawer. Outside the window, Geneva was doing what Geneva did, moving, functioning, alive with the specific activity of a city that was also the seat of something that mattered. The people below did not look different than they had on the morning before she'd said the 2 words. They were going to work. They were getting coffee. A child was running ahead of a parent near the fountain, the way children run, without urgency, just running because legs are a thing you have and running is what you do with them. She watched this for a moment. Then she went to the door and let her staff back in. There was a great deal of work still to do. The tribunal took 8 months. Droth testified on the 4th day. He sat in the chair and told the truth, which was that he had followed orders. He had received the mission parameters. He had executed them. He had believed the legal interpretation was sound. He had not read page 9. The tribunal listened. The tribunal found that none of this was mitigating. Orders existed within a chain that led to a dominion that had made a choice, and that chain led back to him at its operational end, and he was accountable for the end he had occupied. They also found it was not aggravating. He was not a man who had acted from hatred or pleasure. He was a man who had run the math and not put the right things in the columns. The sentence was not imprisonment. It was witness. He was assigned to the Yetharan Reconstruction Coordination Office for the duration of the rebuilding effort, which the independent panel estimated at 4 to 7 years. He would process logistics. He would file reports. He would watch humans run relief convoys to the planet he had chosen for territorial expansion, and he would watch what that work looked like up close, from the inside, with no place to stand that was outside of it. His first day in the coordination office, a human logistics officer named Brecht handed him a binder. "These are the current ration allocation parameters for the ground teams on Yethara," Brecht said. "We're 211 units short on protein supplements for the northern settlement block. I need someone to go through the supply chain records and find where the gap is." Droth took the binder. He looked at it. He looked at Brecht. Brecht was already back at his own desk, pulling up another file. Droth opened the binder. He found the gap at 11:43 in the morning. It was a calculation error in a secondary shipment manifest, compounded across 3 transfers. He flagged it. He wrote the correction in the report field. He submitted it. At 12:00, he ate lunch with the rest of the office staff. Nobody had told him to. Nobody had told him not to. He simply understood that the lunch break was when people ate, and he was people, and this was the time. The northern settlement block got their protein supplements 2 days later. He filed this in his first weekly report. He did not write about what it felt like. He had not been asked to write about what it felt like. He was not sure he had a word for it yet. He thought he might develop one over the next 4 to 7 years. The *unbroken threads *autolog ran for 11 hours after the attack. Recovery teams pulled it from the hull in the first week of the war. The data was intact. The Compact's information office asked, through proper channels, what Earth wanted to do with it. The question went through the Secretary General's office. A staff member there consulted with the surviving families of the convoy's crew, not all families, not a formal poll, but conversations, careful ones, the kind that take time and cannot be rushed. The families of the unbroken thread asked for the autolog to be broadcast, once, on all frequencies, every channel in the compact that would carry it. For 6 minutes and 44 seconds, at a time agreed upon by the compact's Communications Council, every vessel in every fleet in every affiliated civilization received the same signal. The sound of the ship's air recyclers, the ambient hum of equipment, footsteps on a metal corridor floor, someone moving with purpose, someone who had somewhere to be. The distant sound of something beeping steadily in a medical bay, the kind of beep that means a heart is still beating, the kind of beep you stop hearing after a while because it becomes background and background becomes normal and normal becomes something you count on. And the music. Nobody had found out yet who had played it. Probably someone in the crew quarters, maybe someone in the medical bay itself. Something old. Something that had been a song long before it had any reason to be in space. It played for the last 4 minutes of the recording, soft and slightly distorted by the ship's internal speakers. The kind of sound that didn't belong out here and was here anyway, because people bring their music with them wherever they go. Because music is one of the things that makes a place feel like a place you live in rather than a place you merely are. 6 minutes and 44 seconds. Every vessel in every fleet went quiet. The Han representative Cheth later wrote in her personal notes, not the academic paper, not the formal observation report, the personal notes she kept in a small physical book, that she had not understood the word memorial before that transmission. She had understood it as a concept, a practice, a social mechanism for processing loss. After 6 minutes and 44 seconds of static and air recyclers and footsteps, and the soft, misplaced music of a species that brings its songs everywhere it goes, she understood it as a feeling. She wrote in her book, "They are not asking you to mourn with them. They are asking you to know what was lost. Those are different things. The first is about grief. The second is about truth. They wanted the truth known. They wanted the galaxy to hear what a ship sounds like when it is alive." She closed the book. She did not have more words for it than that. 3 civilizations updated their Mercy-class treaty language within the year. 4 more petitioned to join the undersigned parties of the Yetheran Accords, expanding the document's scope. The amendment they all added was identical across all 7 civilizations. The Varathi delegation had drafted it. They had spent 3 nights arguing about the phrasing, too formal, too emotional, too vague, too specific, before arriving at 7 words that said everything that needed saying without saying more than that. There will be no next time for this. 7 words, added to the bottom of the document, below all the formal clauses and legal language and numbered articles. 7 words that were not a law. They were a line. And the galaxy had recently seen, very clearly, what a line looked like when someone crossed it. The Secretary General's last act on the day of the surrender was not official. She went down to the building's front steps, not to address anyone. There was no crowd, no press. She'd slipped out a side door with one aide, and the aide had the good sense to stay 4 steps behind and not speak. She stood on the steps in the evening air, looking at the city. She was tired. Not in the way you are tired after a bad night. In the way you are tired after a long thing that you knew would be long and chose to do anyway, and are now on the other side of, carrying the full weight of the choice along with the outcome of it. She had made the call in 9 minutes. The 9 minutes were not the time it took to decide. The decision had been made years ago, in war games and file revisions and clause amendments and the careful, unglamorous work of a species that believed in preparing for the worst because the worst happened and happened and happened, and the only honest answer to this was to be ready. The 9 minutes were the time it took to confirm, to open the drawer, to say the words. She thought about the people who were not here because of what had happened, the unbroken thread, the water processors, the seed vaults. She thought about the people who were not here because of what came after, because wars killed people who were trying to end them as surely as people who were causing them. She had known this before she said the words. She had counted it in her columns. She thought about Essie, the child in Tor's photograph, whose name she had learned from the Convoy manifest. Essie had survived. She was in a proper hospital now, on a proper planet, getting proper treatment. She was 8 years old. She would probably not remember the inside of the asterisk unbroken thread, the beeping equipment, the doctor who had held her hand and told her it would be all right. She would probably not remember the music. That was all right. The autolog remembered it. The galaxy remembered it now. Far away, in the coordination office on the Yetheran relief station, Droth was filing his second weekly report. In the northern settlement block, a child was eating a meal that existed because a logistics officer had argued with an AI for 40 minutes about 412 units of protein supplement. On a shelf in Cheth's office, a small physical book sat closed. In the Compact's official record, the Yetheran Accords had 7 new words at the bottom. In a drawer behind a desk, on the steps of a building in Geneva, a card said 2. The Secretary General stood on the steps until the evening got cold. Then she went back inside. There was a great deal of work still to do. She did not say this as a complaint. She said it because it was true, and because the work was the point. Not the war, not the surrender, not the tribunal or the amendments or the broadcast or the memorial wall on every ship in a fleet that had come home. The work was the convoy, the next one, the one after that. 17 ships, or 30 or 50, moving toward the next world that needed them, marked with white hulls and red crosses, broadcasting their frequencies on all channels. We carry no weapons. We carry only the wounded. Do not touch us. Moving through the dark between stars, with their music on.